At my youngest son's wedding, my daughter-in-law came up to me and said, "I'm pregnant." I wanted to congratulate her. They had been unable to get pregnant for 7 years and were even planning to adopt a child. But she interrupted my fun when she said, "The father of the child is your husband." I almost fainted from what I heard. It was hard for me to breathe. The waitress noticed that I had turned pale, pulled a chair out for me, and gave me water. But a sip of cold water gave me a surge of strength. I got up, took her hand and went to the room where my son was smoking cigars with his friends. I went up to him and, not shying away from those present, asked, "Is this true? Are you sleeping with her?" He was silent, and then said, "Alison, let's talk it over in private, without witnesses." I couldn't help myself and slapped him on the cheek, which I still regret. This scoundrel is not worth my anger or my emotions. At my youngest son's wedding, my daughter-in-law came up to me and said, "I'm pregnant." I wanted to congratulate her. They had been unable to get pregnant for 7 years and were even planning to adopt a child. But she interrupted my fun when she said, "The father of the child is your husband." I almost fainted from what I heard. It was hard for me to breathe. The waitress noticed that I had turned pale, pulled a chair out for me, and gave me water. But a sip of cold water gave me a surge of strength. I got up, took her hand and went to the room where my son was smoking cigars with his friends. I went up to him and, not shying away from those present, asked, "Is this true? Are you sleeping with her?" He was silent, and then said, "Alison, let's talk it over in private, without witnesses." I couldn't help myself and slapped him on the cheek, which I still regret. This scoundrel is not worth my anger or my emotions. Then everything was like a fog. He made excuses that it was one time. She shouted that she sleeps with him regularly. I couldn't allow that. Because of this we canceled the wedding. So I hid everything from my younger son. I didn't want to ruin their holiday. But my older son impressed me the most. When I called him into a separate room and wanted to calmly tell him everything, he said, "I've known for a long time. The divorce papers are already with the lawyer. My father came and told me he would give me $500,000. I would give him my share of the company. I don't want to see him so happy with the woman I loved more than anything in the world." I was so angry with him. "How long have you known?" "A month, a little more." I hated them all at that moment. Then everything was like a fog. He made excuses that it was one time. She shouted that she sleeps with him regularly. I couldn't allow that. Because of this we canceled the wedding. So I hid everything from my younger son. I didn't want to ruin their holiday. But my older son impressed me the most. When I called him into a separate room and wanted to calmly tell him everything, he said, "I've known for a long time. The divorce papers are already with the lawyer. My father came and told me he would give me $500,000. I would give him my share of the company. I don't want to see him so happy with the woman I loved more than anything in the world." I was so angry with him. "How long have you known?" "A month, a little more." I hated them all at that moment. They say you never forget the smell of cheap cologne mixed with cake frosting and wet grass. I will. It's the perfume that clings to betrayal. Powdery, warm, impossible to wash off because it's tied to a moment that changes everything. There I was, Alison, 62, wearing the blue dress my sister always said brought out whatever color was left in my eyes, and the world registered itself as one where the people I loved had been moving pieces on a board I hadn't even realized I was playing. Let me be clear. I am not fragile. I grew up in Ohio learning how to fix a flat tire and how to make a pot roast feed 12 without the pot feeling lonely. I married young, loved hard, and raised 2 sons who used to come in from the backyard with dirt in their hair and promises in their mouths. I taught algebra for 25 years and learned to keep my cool when a teenager insisted the slope of a line was subjective. I have patience. I have backbone. But patience isn't endurance for everything. There is a limit to what I will swallow with a smile and call being a good mother or a dutiful wife. When Nora, my younger son's bride, the one who had finally smiled like she meant it after years of heartbreak, stopped me with that casual lilt about a pregnancy and the father's identity, the air left my lungs in a way that made even the waiter glance over. I remember thinking, absurdly, about the floral arrangement on the table near us, how the lilies drooped a little as if even they were tired of the charade. The waitress, bless her, gave me a glass of water and, without any of the syrupy consolations people hand out, simply said, "Take your time. That tiny kindness is a detail I will tuck away and use later when decisions required a cool head." When Nora, my younger son's bride, the one who had finally smiled like she meant it after years of heartbreak, stopped me with that casual lilt about a pregnancy and the father's identity, The air left my lungs in a way that made even the waiter glance over. I remember thinking, absurdly, about the floral arrangement on the table near us, how the lilies drooped a little as if even they were tired of the charade. The waitress, bless her, gave me a glass of water and without any of the syrupy consolations people hand out, simply said, "Take your time. That tiny kindness is a detail I will tuck away and use later when decisions required a cool head." I walked into the cigar room like someone who knew exactly what they were about to do. There were men in half unbuttoned shirts, laughter spilling out. My son stood with his back to the window, the light haloing the cigarette smoke. When I asked, pointed and loud, if he was sleeping with his wife, he looked at me as if I had mispronounced a word. That look, the blink of calculation in a child's adult face, is what burned me harder than any slap. He wanted to take it aside. He wanted privacy. How dare he? So I slapped him. My hand stung. The echo of it felt small and animal and deeply human. I still regret losing that instant to reflex, but only for a second. I did it because I needed something physical to remind me I was still the one who could move, who could act. Even then, when I walked away with my cheeks hot and eyes a little blurred, I have inherited my mother's propensity to water on certain emotional days. I kept my chin up. Principles are not only for poems. They are for the family table and the bank account too. What followed could have been a dark comedy, staged wildly in the wrong theater. My son, between excuses that sounded rehearsed, it was a mistake, it was a lapse, it was we had been drinking, and Nora, whose voice thundered that this was ongoing and far from accidental, the truth convulsed our timeline. I did the only thing I thought was honorable. I canceled the wedding. Not because I wanted the drama. Not because revenge tasted sweet in the moment, though let's be honest. There was a grim satisfaction in refusing the pomp to the man who'd betrayed us, but because I refused to have a child born into a cradle of lies and with the man who fathered it sitting at the head of a family at celebration. What followed could have been a dark comedy, staged wildly in the wrong theater. My son, between excuses that sounded rehearsed, it was a mistake, it was a lapse, it was we had been drinking, and Nora, whose voice thundered that this was ongoing and far from accidental, the truth convulsed our timeline. I did the only thing I thought was honorable. I canceled the wedding. Not because I wanted the drama. Not because revenge tasted sweet in the moment, though let's be honest. There was a grim satisfaction in refusing the pomp to the man who'd betrayed us, but because I refused to have a child born into a cradle of lies and with the man who fathered it sitting at the head of a family at celebration. Then came the calculus of the younger son. He had been my baby until he wasn't. I couldn't, in good conscience, let him step into his day knowing the bedrock of his marriage had been charred by my husband. There are things you tell to protect, and so I lied. Not elegantly, not proudly. I hid the reason for the cancellation with a simple morning-afternoon muddle, a family emergency, some scheduling snafu, anything that kept his joy intact and spared him a stain on what should have been a bright beginning. I would not let him remember his wedding as the day everything fell apart, not if I could help it. The older son, Michael, broke my heart quieter. He did not deny he had known. He had the coolness of someone who keeps a ledger for life and records things in dollars and destinies. "I've known for a month," he said, with the sort of indifference that felt like a wound. He had been meeting with a lawyer. He had documents drawn that would cut my husband out with financial precision. He had even arranged a payoff, $500,000 in exchange for his share of the company. He was not naive. He was strategic. He, too, had turned the betrayal into a tally. He had chosen money, leverage, a practical severing. I wanted to throw up and laugh in the same breath. Most people think betrayal arrives as a bolt of light, sudden and blinding. For me, it arrived as a layered drizzle. Hints, phone calls not returned, a joke that landed wrong in the middle of dinner, a tenderness misplaced. The revelation that they had all been complicit, my husband with his steady, infuriating arrogance and appetite, my older son with his simmering, grown-up pragmatism, my younger son's wife with her brazen announcement felt like a house of cards I had been living in. But I have always done better with plans than with despair. You could call it survival instinct, or the stubbornness my mother taught me. If you're going to be in a storm, bring an umbrella and a plan. The first thing I did after the chaos was practical. I protected the younger son's day. We had over 100 guest friends, colleagues, a scattering of cousins, people who had come because weddings are gravitational events, and I would not let those people's memories of my boy's beginning be a funeral for truth. The reception went on. People danced. They toasted. Confetti stuck to shoes. I place my body between the band and the revelation like a seasoned usher, polite, immovable, ever present. But I have always done better with plans than with despair. You could call it survival instinct, or the stubbornness my mother taught me. If you're going to be in a storm, bring an umbrella and a plan. The first thing I did after the chaos was practical. I protected the younger son's day. We had over 100 guest friends, colleagues, a scattering of cousins, people who had come because weddings are gravitational events, and I would not let those people's memories of my boy's beginning be a funeral for truth. The reception went on. People danced. They toasted. Confetti stuck to shoes. I placed my body between the band and the revelation like a seasoned usher, polite, immovable, ever present. Inside, the hum of music and laughter was surreal. I walked among tables, smiled, nodded, made small talk, and clamped down the urge to tell the world the man who danced with my daughter-in-law was the same man whose stockbroker calls I used to manage with him. A mother knows how to move through chaos like a conductor hiding the missing instrument from the audience. But every smile I gave was a calibrated act. When the younger son caught my eye across the room, radiant in his ill-fitted tux that made him look 6 inches taller, I mouthed I was sorry. He smiled back, trusting, blissfully certain his universe was intact. That trust became my fuel. After the reception, as the last guests were waving goodbyes and the lights came down like borrowed stars, I drove home in a fog of exhaustion and something else, something like the cold clarity of a woman who had been betrayed and was, finally, awake. The house smelled of dinner and lemon oil. My husband's shoes were lined near the study. The TIs he loved, silk, patterned. The ones I brought back from Paris because he'd said once that a tie was a man's private joy, lay folded in their drawer. For years I had ironed his shirts on Fridays and set aside the crisp collar for Sunday morning. That small ritual became a scar. I did what many women in movies do, but not the foolish, destructive sort that leaves people hurt and bodies bruised. I collected his things. Suit jackets that had cost more than my first car. Shirts with monograms I had embroidered the first year of our marriage, in a fit of romantic foolishness that now felt like a joke. I didn't shout. I didn't strike. I did something calmer, and perhaps more damning. I created evidence. You will have to wait for the video I later posted. I know, dramatic, and the social media age makes everything into theater, but for now let me end with this. I stood barefoot on the grass, the summer chill biting at my ankles, a metal barrel humming in the corner of the yard. I set his suits one by one on the pyre. I did it with the theatricality of a stagehand setting props, with the quietness of someone who knows how to make a mark without blood. I filmed it, not as a call for violence, but as testimony, a woman marking the end of one chapter and the first step of her own resurrection. I spoke to the camera, a steady voice that surprised me. You will have to wait for the video I later posted. I know, dramatic, and the social media age makes everything into theater, but for now let me end with this. I stood barefoot on the grass, the summer chill biting at my ankles, a metal barrel humming in the corner of the yard. I set his suits one by one on the pyre. I did it with the theatricality of a stagehand setting props, with the quietness of someone who knows how to make a mark without blood. I filmed it, not as a call for violence, but as testimony, a woman marking the end of one chapter and the first step of her own resurrection. I spoke to the camera, a steady voice that surprised me. Here are your expensive suits burning, I said, and felt no triumph there, only a release. The TIs I brought you from Paris. The shirts I took to the dry cleaner every Friday. Just as you burn my heart, I burn your wardrobe. Well, fashionista, congratulations. Now you've shown your true nature. If you want the rest, there are more parts. There are contracts. And a lawyer friend from college named Julia, who once told me, at 22, not to marry that charming man, and who, at 60, has become my fiercest ally. There is a marriage contract clause I wrote herself, tongue-in-cheek, decades ago and never imagined I'd use, but I will. There is the slow, elegant, non-violent unmaking of a life I once thought was unassailable. There is the reinvention of Alison, the girl who ironed shirts every Friday and buried her desires in the hamper, into Alison, the woman who will reclaim more than what they stole. Part 2 will tell you how Julia finds that marriage clause, how I dust off a life of small savings and quiet competence and tilt it toward business, and how I begin to extract justice with the patience of a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. By morning, the video had done what shame never could. It found an audience. People love a bonfire, especially when it's a wardrobe going up like a parade float. My phone lit up with messages that read like sympathy cards and rubbernecking combined. Are you okay? Girl, call me. Legend. Some were sweet, some nosy, some confused. A few old acquaintances sent me those long paragraphs where every sentence begins with "as a mother," which is code for "I am about to patronize you." I ignored them. What I didn't ignore was the doorbell at 8:03 a.m. When I opened it. There she was, Julia, in a navy suit the exact color of the truth. She had the same no-nonsense bob she wore in college and the same arched eyebrow that used to make professors stop mid-lecture. In school, she'd been the one who dragged me to office hours and out of bad ideas. When I started dating my husband, she said, "Darling, he's 3 TIs and 2 girlfriends ahead of you." I called her dramatic then. Turns out she was merely punctual with reality. "Coffee," she said by way of hello, stepping in, already sliding her bag onto the chair like a judge taking the bench. "I have some." I handed her a mug. My hands were steady. It felt like a small miracle. She surveyed the living room the way a general surveys a battlefield, eyes catching on the faint ash smudges dragged in on my heels from the yard. "Good. You've already begun the purge." I decided not to wait for contrition, I said. "It's never in season when you need it." Julia smiled, the unkind kind reserved for enemies. Then she softened at me. "Give me your marriage contract." I paused. "You kept it?" "I drafted it," she said, offended by the question. "And I'm a lawyer, not a balloon artist. I keep the things I make." We went to the safe, the ugly metal one my husband always said was ours, in the tone of someone saying mine with a plural added for romance. I'd used it for passports and diplomas, and once, because life is funny, a little finger painting my older son made in kindergarten, a blue tiger with too many teeth. The prenup lay there in its crisp folder, modest as a church dress. Julia pulled it out like a magician's scarf and flipped to a page flagged with an ancient neon post-it. "In case of cheating," she read aloud, voice smooth as a gavel, "the aggrieved spouse high. That's you acquires 80% ownership of any business entity organized during or prior to the marriage in which the offending spouse exercises control, direct or indirect." My mouth went dry. We had written that paragraph on a summer night when cicadas were loud and we were louder, 20-somethings clinking wine glasses and swearing we'd never be fools. My husband had laughed at it. He'd called it my dramatic clause, signed anyway, and held me afterward like you hold the safe thing you think will never test you. 80%, I said now, savoring the number like a lemon lozenge. "Julia, that's most of it. It's the controlling stake," she corrected. "It's the steering wheel, the keys, and the spare tire. And it's enforceable because he initialed here." Her nail tapped the margin. "Twice." "Do I have proof?" I asked. And I didn't mean emotionally. "Enough to make it more than a bonfire and some rumors?" Julia slid a legal pad from her bag, the kind with a margin that looks like a bright red line you're not supposed to cross. "We'll get it. No violence. No dramatics we can't defend. Paper is king." She wrote a list, bullet points forming like marching orders. "We need an affidavit from Nora, medical confirmation of pregnancy with paternity testing, if she cooperates. Dates, hotel receipts, anything that gives us a timeline. The video helps because it establishes state of mind and notice. And we need to freeze assets so he doesn't move anything before we get to court." "Freeze his assets," I echoed. "Now you're speaking my love language." Julia smirked. "I learned from the best. Also, call your bank and put a temporary authorization block on joint withdrawals. I'll draft an emergency order. We'll argue fraudulent conveyance if he tries to sell anything under market value, like, say, your older son's share." The mention of Michael felt like pressing a bruise. "He took a payout," I said, "months ago. He knew." "Then he gets a choice," Julia said, crisp as a napkin. "He can bring his share back to the table and apologize, or he can meet me in court as an accessory to a fraudulent transfer. I'll be polite. I won't be gentle." I looked at her and laughed, a small, wild sound I didn't recognize as mine. "God, I missed you. You missed the version of you who believed you deserved friends like me," she said, gentle now. "She's still here." We moved like a well-rehearsed duo. I called the bank. Julia called a clerk. I texted Nora, because that silence was a worse enemy than noise. I chose my words like stepping stones across a river. "I heard what you told me. I won't ruin your life, but I need the truth on paper. Come talk." She answered 2 hours later with a confusion that read like contrition. She had always wanted to be part of our family. She had apparently settled for a dark corner of it. Now she was suspended between a wedding dress and a headline. While we waited, I walked the house with a plastic bin and gathered the small emblems of a life I'd kept polished for someone else. Monogrammed cuff links, a drawer of tangled charger cords only he knew the purpose of, cuff button sets in little velvet coffins. Into the bin they went, like relics from a church that had closed for lack of believers. I left the pictures, let the frames hold their ghosts until I decided which ones deserved to live on the mantle and which ones belonged in a box labeled lessons. At noon, the doorbell again. Not my husband, he had the good sense of a fox with smoke in his fur. It was Nora. She wore yesterday's makeup and a sweatshirt that said bride in rhinestones, as if irony were a sport. Her hands shook. The baby was already dictating her balance. She moved in that protective way women do when they're carrying more than themselves. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here to finish the truth. She sat at my table and cried a little like a leaky faucet. Julia handed her tissues and a pen. We need dates, Julia said, tone professional but not cruel. Places. Who initiated what? Whether protection was used. We need honesty. Not because we are aiming to hurt you, but because we are aiming to repair the damage you helped cause. It started at Christmas, Nora said, voice broke at the gift wrap. I was lonely. He was kind. I repeated, the word like a bubble that popped and left soap on my lip. He is many things. Let's be accurate. She flushed. He said he'd leave you. He said a lot. She looked at her stomach. I wanted a baby, she whispered. I wanted a future that didn't feel like a waiting room. I wanted to hate her cleanly, like ripping a bandage. I couldn't. Not because she deserved my mercy, but because I could see my younger self in her, the version that thought a charismatic man was a shortcut to a destiny. I saved my contempt for the man who'd taught her to confuse attention with devotion, right? Julia said, and placed the affidavit in front of her like a small raft. Nora wrote, dates, hotels, a weekend in March when they told my younger son she was at a wellness retreat. Receipts followed email confirmations, those smug little thank you for your stay notes people forget live forever. She gave us the truth like beads sliding off a string, shocked to see how many there were when they pooled in her lap. When she finished, she held the paper the way you hold the first ultrasound photo. What will happen to me? She asked. You will live with the consequences of your choices, I said, not cruel, not kind. And so will he. If you want a different future, make different choices from now on. That child is not a bargaining chip. It is a person who will someday read the story of how they arrived. Nora nodded, tears on her sweatshirt like sequins. She left quieter than she came. I didn't watch her go. I have learned you don't stare after disasters. You turn to the blueprint. By late afternoon, Julia had filed the emergency motion. The judge we drew was one who didn't smile even at grandchildren. Perfect. She set a hearing for Tuesday and issued a temporary restraining order on transfers above $10,000. The business my husband's gleaming darling would sit under a glass dome until we argued. Next, Julia said, and her pen tapped the legal pad, we call Michael. I dreaded it, not because I feared confrontation, but because I still had the muscle memory of smoothing his hair before picture day. Motherhood is a tattoo you can't laser off. I called. He picked up, voice wary and stainless steel smooth. Mom, Michael, I said. I'm invoking the clause. A beat. He exhaled the way men do when they realize the woman they underestimated has been doing math. You found it. Found it? I laughed softly. I wrote it. He tried to pivot. Look, this is between you and Dad. I took the deal. I'm out. You took a fraudulent transfer in anticipation of a divorce and corporate restructuring, I said, proud to taste the lawyer in my mouth. Which means you're in. Mom, you knew for a month, I said, finally letting the hurt land without breaking me. You watched me iron his shirts on Fridays and you knew. He was quiet. Then softer. I didn't want to blow up the family. You didn't prevent an explosion, I said. You sold tickets. I let that sit. Bring your share back by Monday. Make a statement supporting the clause. Or meet Julia in court. He sighed. Julia's with you? Always, I said. We came in a set. He hung up without promising anything. That was fine. Some men are brave only when there's an audience. Tuesday would give him one. Evening brought a text from my husband at last, an operatic paragraph about public humiliation, immature theatrics, and how could you do this to the boys? I typed and erased 10 replies. Then I settled on one. See you in court. Wear something you don't mind losing. I slept that night like a woman who'd cleaned out a closet and found the floor beneath it. No peace, let's not be saints, but a kind of orderly quiet that felt earned. In dreams, I heard papers shuffling like leaves. I woke ready to rake. The next 2 days were a montage of competence. I met with a forensic accountant named Dolores, who wore sneakers with her suit and had a predatory affection for spreadsheets. She found shell LLCs like truffles. I sat with our accountant and learned the business's arteries, where the cash flowed, which clients paid on the dot, which vendors were 2 checks late and owed favors. I took notes like a student who plans to teach the class next semester. In between, I answered messages from friends. Most stayed safely behind their screens. One neighbor sent me a casserole, the secular sacrament of suburban crisis. I ate it standing up, looking at my yard, the barrel quiet now, a dented moon on the grass. I reminded myself that the bonfire was theater. The real action would be signatures and numbers. It was Julia who said the word I'd been avoiding. When you win the stake, she said, you don't sell. You step in. Step in. I repeated. As in you become what he never believed you could be, she said. Boss, owner, chairwoman. If you feel like a tiara, you don't torch the company. You turn it. You build it better. You hire women who have had to smile through meetings. And when he tries to saunter back as the visionary, you show him the employee handbook and the security badge he no longer has. I looked at my hands, at the faint ash still under a nail. I taught algebra, Julia, and you run a household, she said. Do you know how many CFOs can't balance a pantry? You can learn operations. Vision you already have. The idea slid into me like a new spine. I tried it on for size. Alison, businesswoman, not an act. A role I had rehearsed unknowingly for years. Each time I stretched a budget, negotiated a contract for the roof repair, resolved a brotherly conflict with pizza and policy. The skill set had always been there, wrapped in the domestic cloak. I'd just been too busy ironing someone else's shirts to notice I owned an iron. On Tuesday, I wore the blue suit my sister said made me look like a senator's favorite ally and walked into court on heels that clicked like punctuation. My husband was already there in a power tirade, because subtlety is not his tradition, supported by a lawyer I recognized from charity galas, expensive and performative. Michael sat behind them, face pale, regret or calculation. I had stopped pretending I could tell those apart in my sons. The judge peered over her glasses. The affidavits lay like neat bricks before her. Nora's words, hotel receipts, my video muted, mercifully, but those orange flames licking silk told their mute truth. Julia spoke with an elegance that felt like music. No crescendo, just steady measure, each fact placed like a bishop on a chessboard. Opposing counsel sputtered about privacy and public spectacle, as if the real sin were my refusal to be discreet about a man's indecency. At the end, the judge issued a preliminary ruling. The clause was valid, the evidence of infidelity sufficient to trigger its provisional enforcement, the assets frozen, a special master appointed to oversee the business until the final hearing. And then, almost as an afterthought that rearranged the furniture of my future, she said, Mrs. Clarke, my married name, for the last time in a formal room you may assume interim managerial authority, limited to ordinary course operations, pending resolution. My husband turned to me with the face of a man watching a house he built tilt towards someone else's name. I met his eyes. I didn't smile. I simply stood. Afterward, in the corridor, Michael approached. He looked like my boy again for a second, the one who'd once cried over a bent science fair volcano. Mom, he said, wrecked. I made a mistake. Yes, I said. You did. I let him stew there. Then, do better. I'll return the shares, he said, voice hoarse. I'll make a statement. It wasn't contrition. It was a beginning. I nodded. You can come to Sunday dinner when you learn how to tell the truth before it's convenient. He swallowed and nodded back. We walked out into the blinding democratic light of the courthouse steps. Cameras had gathered, small ones, nosy ones, the kind that stitch a stranger's misery into their afternoon scroll. I didn't stop. This wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about work. That night, I set my alarm for 5. Tomorrow I would walk into a building with my husband's name on the door and claim the desk he never offered me. I would shake hands with employees who only knew me as the lady who sent Christmas cookies. I would sit in a conference room that smelled like stale coffee and strategy and say, "Good morning, I'm Alison. Let's get to it." What I didn't know yet, the part that makes a good ending for a chapter and a delicious start for the next, was that the first person waiting in the lobby would not be an employee at all, but a woman from a rival firm with an offer that would test whether I wanted revenge or power or both properly plated. Mrs. Clarke, she would say, hand extended, smile sharp. I think we can help each other. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something I hadn't felt in decades. Anticipation. My house, stripped of his presence, was quiet in a new way. Not lonely quiet, but pregnant with potential. The kind of silence that hums with the question, "What will you do now?" I brewed my coffee strong enough to qualify as an act of courage, tied my hair back, and put on a crisp white shirt that still smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. It wasn't new, but it was mine. No borrowed elegance, no pretense. I looked in the mirror, saw the lines life had etched, and smiled. "Well, Alison," I told the reflection, "time to show them who trained for war by folding laundry and keeping books balanced to the penny." The company, our company, though the possessive had always been his, sat on the edge of town in one of those glass and steel boxes meant to make people feel small and impressed. Clarke and Miles Engineering. The Clarke was him. The Miles had been his late business partner, who died too soon, and if the rumors were true, too disappointed in my husband. As I approached, employees milled outside, whispering, phones in hand. The bonfire video had reached every corner of the internet by now. Some looked at me with awe, some with alarm, and one young woman actually gave me a subtle thumbs up. I winked back. We women recognize each other in the wild. Inside, the lobby smelled of expensive flowers and fear. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Tasha, whom I remembered from holiday parties, blinked, clearly uncertain if she should stand, salute, or run. "Good morning," I said brightly. "I'm Mrs. Clarke. I'll be taking over interim management." Her jaw dropped. "Oh, of course, Mrs. Clarke. Congratulations." "Let's go with welcome back," I said, smiling. "Congratulations are premature. There's much to be done." I hadn't stepped into that office in years. My husband used to joke that business wasn't a place for soft hearts. I used to laugh, pour him coffee, and never notice that what he called softness was actually empathy. It turns out, empathy has sharper edges than greed if you know how to use it. The first thing I did was head to his office. It was locked. How poetic. I turned to Tasha. "Get maintenance to open this, please." "Yes, ma'am." She scampered off, returning minutes later with a man holding a key ring large enough to anchor a ship. The lock clicked, and I stepped into what had once been his kingdom. Leather, glass, ego. Everything in that office screamed self-made man, though I'd watched him use my inheritance to self-make half of it. His chair was turned toward the window, the skyline smugly reflected in its leather. I circled the room slowly, touching nothing but seeing everything. On his desk sat a photo of the four of us, our family, taken 5 Christmases ago. My sons had their arms around me. My husband had his arm around himself. Even then, the pose had been prophetic. I set the photo face down. Then I opened the top drawer and found a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond bracelet, not mine. I'd never owned anything so loud. There was a receipt tucked under it dated 3 months ago, billed to the company card. "Jewelry Unlimited. To Nora Allen." The audacity nearly made me laugh. Cheating on your wife with your son's wife is already a Shakespearean tragedy. Doing it on the company's dime is just bad accounting. I tucked the receipt into my purse. Evidence, not emotion. At 9 sharp, I called a meeting. Every department head was to report to the conference room. The assistant looked at me with wide eyes, like someone asked to wrangle tigers, but I smiled sweetly. "Please let them know attendance is mandatory." They came. Engineering leads in wrinkled shirts, marketing in curated ones, finance people with spreadsheets tattooed behind their eyes. Some avoided my gaze, some stared openly. One older man, a CFO named Grant, cleared his throat and said, "Mrs. Clarke, with respect, this is unexpected." "Oh, Grant," I said, settling at the head of the table. "Life's most interesting chapters begin with something unexpected. Please sit." The silence was rich enough to spread on toast. "I'll be brief," I began. "As you know, Mr. Clarke is on a temporary leave of absence. Effective immediately, I'm assuming interim control of operations. There will be no layoffs, no chaos, and no secrets. You'll find I value honesty and competence far more than charm." Someone coughed. I think it was admiration in disguise. I continued, "We've been profitable, yes, but stagnant. Innovation doesn't thrive under dictatorship, it thrives under collaboration. And if anyone here was loyal to my husband because they feared him, you'll have to learn a new language. I don't rule by fear. I rule by results." A woman at the far end, sharp eyes, blazer too big for her title, leaned forward. "What about the pending contracts? We've got clients who only sign because of him. What's your name? I asked. Carmen, director of projects. Carmen, I said, smiling. You're about to find out clients don't sign contracts with a man. They sign them with confidence. Let's call each of them this week. Personally, we'll show them the same results just with less cologne and more conscience. There were muffled laughs. I could feel the tension shifting one molecule at a time. Fear was being replaced by curiosity. By the end of the meeting, I'd set up 3 task forces, one to audit every project, one to review finances for irregularities, and one to assess employee satisfaction, something my husband had once dismissed as emotional nonsense. I scheduled weekly open door hours. I could practically feel Julia's proud smirk through the phone when I texted her, "The queen is on the throne." By noon, word had spread through the building. And as I was reviewing reports in that absurdly large office, Tasha knocked on the door. "Mrs. Clarke, there's someone here to see you." "Who?" "She says she's from a rival firm, Harper Engineering. Her name's Lydia Brooks. Send her in." A woman stepped through the door like she owned the sunlight, early 40s, sleek hair, eyes like blueprints. Everything about her was precise. She extended her hand. "Mrs. Clarke, it's a pleasure." "Is it?" I asked, shaking her hand. "You don't strike me as a woman who does things for pleasure." She smiled slightly. "Fair. I do them for opportunity. And this is one." She handed me a folder. Inside were glossy reports, partnership proposals, shared ventures, whispers of potential mergers. Harper Engineering was smaller, but rising fast. She had something to prove. So did I. "I've heard what happened," Lydia said matter-of-factly. "It's been all over the news." I didn't flinch. "Good. Let them talk. It means they're paying attention." She tilted her head, impressed. "Exactly why I'm here. You've got control of Clarke and Miles. You've got public sympathy and curiosity. You've also got chaos. I have capital. I propose a collaboration. Equal stake. You bring the name and infrastructure. I bring liquidity and expansion." It was smart, dangerous but smart, and I admired dangerous women. I also distrusted them on sight. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're making headlines, not excuses," she said smoothly. "And because everyone loves a redemption arc. You have a window, Mrs. Clarke. People will follow your leadership if you act fast." I leaned back. "And what does Harper Engineering get in return?" She smiled. "Your client base, your brand prestige, and maybe," she added, "a woman at the top who doesn't underestimate me." I liked her. I also knew a deal that looked too good often hit a hook. Still, the offer was a card I could play when the time came. "I'll think about it," I said. "But I don't move fast just because someone tells me I should." Her grin widened. "That's what makes you interesting." When she left, the air in the office seemed clearer, lighter. I could feel the universe rearranging itself around me, small shifts that meant momentum. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was steering. That night, I invited Julia over for dinner. We ate takeout straight from the cartons, like college girls with better credit scores. "So," she said between bites, "you met the shark?" "Lydia Brooks," I confirmed. Sharp teeth, polished smile. "She's competent," Julia admitted, "and predatory. But if you play it right, she could be your ladder. Or your lesson." "I'll climb her if I must," I said. "But I'll build my own ladder too." Julia raised her chopsticks like a toast. "To revenge served as a business plan. To women who read the fine print," I said. We laughed until the wine ran out and the night settled into something softer than grief, something like purpose. When Julia left, I sat alone in my quiet house and looked out the window toward the charred barrel still standing in the yard. The stars above it blinked like silent witnesses. I thought about the boy I had raised, who had turned into a man who sold his silence. About the girl who mistook lust for love. About the man who thought he could break me and walk away unscathed. And I thought about the woman sitting in his chair now, making calls, signing papers, reclaiming her name. I whispered into the dark, not a prayer but a promise. "You took my family. I'll take your empire." And the night air, thick with smoke and memory, seemed to answer back, finally. The first thing I learned about power was that it doesn't announce itself, it hums. It's in the way people lower their voices when you walk by. It's in the pause before they say your name, testing whether they still need permission. And that Monday morning, Clarke and Miles hummed for me. The company had been built on concrete and ego, but under my hand, it started to breathe differently. I spent that first week in meetings from sunrise to sunset, reading, asking, listening. Men hate when women listen. They mistake it for submission. But I was cataloging, tracing every inconsistency, every missing invoice, every miscellaneous expense my husband had buried in euphemisms. By Wednesday, I'd uncovered 3 ghost vendors' business names that didn't exist anywhere outside our ledger, each with small but steady payments attached. Curious, I asked Dolores, the forensic accountant, to dig deeper. She showed up that afternoon with a grin wide enough to slice marble. You were right, she said, tossing a folder onto my desk. Your husband has been paying Nora's rent through shell companies. Here 3 addresses, same routing number. I looked at the figures, monthly payments just shy of $10,000, trying to stay under reporting limits. I murmured, amateur hour, Dolores said. And there's more. One of the shell accounts is linked to an LLC that technically makes you the majority owner now, thanks to that prenup clause. He's been funding his mistress with your money. The laughter that bubbled out of me then startled even myself. Oh, Julia will love this. I called Julia that evening and read her the details while she stirred something on the stove. We could sue him into dust with this, she said. Oh, I plan to, I said, but first, I'd like to enjoy watching him choke on the smoke. And then, just to make my point clear to the universe, I emailed his attorney. Dear Mr. Randall, kindly inform your client that I am now aware of his misuse of corporate funds. I'll allow him the courtesy of repaying the full amount within 5 business days before I initiate criminal proceedings. Yours, Alison Clarke, majority owner, Clarke and Miles Engineering. It wasn't about the money. It was about tone. That Friday, I decided to make a small but symbolic change. I called facilities, take down the nameplate on the office door. I told them, it shouldn't read Jonathan Clarke, CEO. Replace it with a Clarke, acting CEO. They hesitated. Ma'am, do you want to wait until? No, I said, smiling. Do it now. By noon, when the plaque went up, the office hummed again, an audible ripple of gossip that delighted me. When Jonathan arrived later that afternoon, uninvited of course, he found it waiting for him. He looked at it, then at me, like a man realizing the snake he thought was declawed had learned to dance. So this is what you wanted, he said, voice like gravel and syrup. Power, a stage. I stood, folded my arms. No, Jonathan, this is what I deserve. Power I earned by cleaning up your mess, stage included. Though I do have to thank you for the lighting, it's very flattering. His jaw worked, grinding words he couldn't afford to say. You're embarrassing yourself, he hissed. I'm embarrassing you, I corrected. It's not the same thing. He started to speak again, but I held up a hand. You've got until Tuesday to repay the company funds you used for your extracurricular philanthropy. After that, the dog gets your name, the receipts, and the video of your wardrobe barbecue. His face went a shade between ivory and rage. You wouldn't, Jonathan, I said sweetly. I've already have. I just haven't hit send yet. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the blinds shuddered. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the aftermath. The air smelled of lemon polish and victory. By the end of the second week, I had turned Clarke and Miles from chaos into choreography. We hosted a meeting with 3 key clients who'd been ready to jump ship after the scandal. I walked into that boardroom in a cream suit and said, Gentlemen, the circus has left town. The engineers are back in charge. They laughed, relaxed, and by the end of the hour, renewed their contracts. Carmen, my sharp-eyed project director, lingered after everyone else had gone. Mrs. Clarke, she said, I just want to say it's good to have a woman running this place. He never listened to anyone. Listening is cheaper than lawsuits, I said, smiling. And smarter too. Carmen grinned. If you ever decide to keep the CEO title permanently, you'll have my vote. I didn't answer. I was already thinking it. Saturday night, I found myself sitting at my dining table with a glass of red wine, flipping through Lydia Brooks' proposal again. It was still bold, still risky, but it had merit. Her firm specialized in sustainable infrastructure, and that was the direction the market was shifting. If I could merge that vision with the technical muscle Clarke and Miles already had, we could reinvent the entire company and turn my husband's empire into something that had my fingerprints on every polished surface. So, I invited Lydia to dinner. She arrived in a black blazer and jeans, as if she'd come to seduce a deal instead of negotiate one. I wasn't sure you'd call, she said. I wasn't sure either, I replied, pouring her wine. But I respect ambition, especially when it's dressed in leather boots. We spent 3 hours talking shop, and for the first time in my adult life, I realized how thrilling business could be when you weren't sitting in the audience. We drew plans on napkins, laughed over horror stories of arrogant men in boardrooms, and by dessert, Lydia leaned back, studying me. You're dangerous, she said, half admiring, half wary. And not because you're vindictive, because you're enjoying this. I smiled into my glass. Why shouldn't I? They enjoyed underestimating me for 30 years. When she left, she paused at the door. If you say yes, we'll both make history. Two women running one of the biggest engineering firms in the region. You'll scare them half to death. That's the goal, I said. She nodded. Call me Monday. That night, I wrote in my journal a habit I'd lost somewhere between PTA meetings and tax returns. I've spent a lifetime building men's comfort. Now I'm building my own legacy. Let them call it revenge. I call it reclamation. The next morning, I drove out to my mother's old cabin by the lake. She'd left it to me years ago, and I hadn't been back since before the boys were grown. It was quiet, all pine and fog, and the water looked like a mirror. I stood on the porch and thought about the girl I'd been when I married Jonathan, 23, hopeful, too in love with the sound of his confidence to notice it drowned out her own. I wished I could tell her what was coming, not to warn her off, but to prepare her. You'll be betrayed, yes, but you'll also survive. And one day, you'll run the empire he thought was his birthright. I stayed there until sunset, then drove home with a calm I hadn't felt since before the wedding. My life wasn't a storm anymore. It was a project. When I got back, there was an email from Julia waiting for me. Subject line, checkmate, darling. She'd attached a court order. Jonathan's accounts had been frozen, pending investigation for corporate fraud. His lawyer had withdrawn representation. At the bottom of her email, Julia had written, "Welcome to the boardroom, Alison. Wear heels and bring fire." I laughed until my sides hurt. Then I opened a new file on my laptop. Project Phoenix. The rebranding plan for Clarke and Miles Engineering. New logo, new mission, new leadership, under CEO. I typed, Alison Clarke. And for the first time, it didn't feel borrowed. It felt inevitable. Monday morning came with a sky so clean it looked ironed. I put on my navy suit, the one that said competent but unpredictable, and walked into Clarke and Miles like I'd been walking into it my whole life. The new nameplate gleamed on the office door. A. Clarke, acting CEO. Tasha smiled as I passed. Good morning, Mrs. Clarke. Good morning, Tasha. How's the coffee in this place? Still tastes like burnt ambition, she said, and we both laughed. That laugh mattered. It meant the building was breathing again. Inside my office, I spread out the latest audit reports. Dolores had been thorough. God bless women who find beauty in balance sheets. She'd discovered a web of tiny thefts, consulting fees to non-existent firms, padded invoices, and secret accounts. My husband's empire was built on concrete, sure, but the foundation was rotten. Good, I said aloud, tracing the numbers with my pen. Rot gives way easily when you know where to hit it. I called Julia first. Your charming ex is trying to unfreeze his accounts, she said before I could even say hello. Of course he is. Men like him think paperwork bends for personality. Don't worry, she said. The judge wasn't impressed by his crocodile tears. We're solid. Now, about Lydia Brooks, have you decided? I looked at the folder still sitting on my desk, Lydia's neat handwriting in the margins. I'm not just deciding, I said. I'm counter-offering. Oh, here we go, Julia said, voice smiling. By noon, Lydia was sitting across from me again, wearing a silk blouse the color of champagne and the confidence of someone used to winning. I've reviewed your proposal, I said, sliding her papers back across the table. I like the bones, but I'm making some renovations. Her eyebrow arched. I'm listening. You offered a 50-50 its partnership. I want 60-40 me holding control. You'll get first rights on government bids and co-branding on sustainable projects. But the leadership remains under Clarke and Miles. She tilted her head. That's bold. Necessary, I said. This isn't charity. It's evolution. You and I both know half and half only works in coffee. She grinned slowly. You drive a hard bargain. I'm 62, I said. If I've learned anything, it's that men negotiate from ego and women from outcome. I'm interested in outcomes. She leaned back. Deal. We shook hands. The partnership was official. Project Phoenix had a second flame. That week was a blur of motion. We held a press conference, my first as CEO. I stood at the podium in front of reporters and said, this company has weathered scandal, loss, and transition. But today, it begins again. Clarke and Miles is no longer a monument to one man's ambition. It's a testament to the people who build, innovate, and believe in integrity, including myself. The headline the next morning read, The wife WHO rose from the ashes. Alison Clarke takes control. Underneath it, a photo of me chin lifted, eyes bright, the faintest smirk. I looked like a woman who'd come through hell and found it overrated. Messages poured in, from old students, from women I hadn't seen in decades, from strangers who'd watched my bonfire video and whispered finally. One message, though, stood out. It was from my younger son, the one whose wedding had been the beginning of this whole nightmare. Mom, I don't know what to say. I didn't know how bad it was. I'm sorry for what she did. I'm sorry for what Dad did. I love you. I read it 3 times before replying. I love you too. You're not responsible for other people's betrayals, but don't ever let someone else write your story again, even out of love. He sent back a heart emoji, the modern olive branch. It was enough. Meanwhile, Michael the elder was still avoiding me. Julia called it strategic cowardice. I called it Tuesday. But fate has a sense of humor, because by Thursday he showed up at the office, holding a folder like a peace treaty. Mom, he said quietly, I brought the paperwork. I'm transferring my shares back to you. Good, I said, not smiling. Sit down. He did, hands trembling slightly. I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I was being smart. Dad said he'd leave you nothing, that you'd just fade away. I said. The myth of the vanishing woman. We're harder to erase than you think. He swallowed. You proved that. I didn't prove it, Michael. I lived it. I leaned forward. You need to learn something. Every betrayal has a return on investment if you know where to put the pain. I put mine into purpose. What will you do with yours? He didn't answer, but he nodded, slow, shameful, honest. It was a start. As he left, I called after him. Sunday dinner's back on, I said. If you can stand eating with a woman who burns wardrobes for sport, he grinned. I'll bring dessert. Progress. Now that the company was legally mine, I did what every smart woman does after a heartbreak. Redecorated. I had the office repainted a soft slate blue, replaced the heavy mahogany furniture with glass and steel. I had the old executive portraits taken down, my husband's smug face included, and replaced them with photos of our engineers at work, hard hats and laughter, the real builders. Carmen brought me flowers for the desk. You're changing everything, she said. That's the idea, I replied. I introduced mentorship programs for young female engineers, flexible schedules for parents, and profit sharing for employees who'd been overlooked. Productivity went up 18% in the first month. I had the numbers printed and framed, hung them on the wall behind my desk. Not art, but proof. By spring, Clarke and Miles rebranded as Clarke Innovations was thriving. Lydia's projects brought us into renewable energy sectors, and suddenly the same men who once dismissed me were calling for meetings. I took them all, smiled sweetly, and let them talk themselves into giving me everything I wanted. And Jonathan? He called once, just once. Alison, he said, voice cracked and hoarse. You've made your point, have I? I said mildly. Because I'm just getting started. I've lost everything, he said. I sighed. No, dear, you lost me. Everything else was just collateral damage. He was quiet for a long time. Then, you won't forgive me, will you? Forgiveness is boring, I said, and hung up. That night, I posted one more video. Not a bonfire this time. Just me in my office, the city lights behind me. For anyone watching who's ever been betrayed, cheated, or underestimated, listen carefully. You don't need revenge that ruins you. You need revenge that rebuilds you. Let them watch you rise. Let them choke on your silence and your success. Burn what you must, but build something better from the ashes. It went viral. Women everywhere shared it, called it the sermon of the century. My inbox filled with stories, wives, mothers, daughters, women in their 60s starting again. I read every one, because once upon a time, I was one of them. The following week, I stood in front of the company's new sign, Clarke Innovations, designed by Integrity. Reporters took photos. Lydia stood beside me, Julia on my other side, both women grinning like thieves who'd just robbed a bank for justice. When the cameras stopped flashing, Julia leaned close and whispered, you know, you could sell this story. Netflix would eat it alive. I laughed. Maybe one day, but for now, I'm busy living the sequel. Lydia chuckled. What's next then? You've got the company, the legacy, the redemption arc. I smiled. Oh, I'm not done. My husband built an empire. I'm going to build a dynasty. And as the ribbon fell and the crowd applauded, I thought not of the betrayal, not of the pain but of the woman I'd become, a woman who could walk through hell in heels and come out owning the place. If my story had been a movie, that ribbon cutting would have been the end, the triumphant music swelling, my hair catching the light just right, Julia and Lydia laughing on either side of me. But real life doesn't tie itself up in neat bows. It leaves strings, and sometimes those strings pull you into one last performance. It began 2 weeks after the launch of Clarke Innovations. The company was running smoother than I'd dared to hope. Lydia's renewable project was already attracting investors. The boardroom chatter had turned from crisis management to expansion strategy. My mornings started with conference calls instead of coffee for someone else. I didn't wake up to worry anymore, I woke up to plans. And yet, somewhere between meetings and headlines, I got a call I didn't expect. Mrs. Clarke, said a trembling voice on the other end. It's Nora. The air left the room for a moment. I hadn't spoken to her since that wedding day, since her confession detonated my life like a grenade wrapped in white lace. I don't want trouble, she said quickly. I need to talk. My instinct said no, my curiosity said otherwise. Come by the office, I said. Tomorrow at 10. Alone. When she arrived, she looked small, not fragile, but diminished, like someone who'd been walking uphill for too long. Her belly had grown round, her hands resting protectively over it. Thank you for seeing me, she whispered. I'm not a priest, Nora. You don't need absolution. She looked down. I lost everything. I folded my hands on the desk. Then we have something in common. She winced, but nodded. I wanted to say I'm sorry, not because I expect forgiveness, I know I don't deserve that, but because I was stupid. I thought love was something you could steal. You didn't steal anything, I said, voice steady. You borrowed the illusion of it from a man who's been renting out illusions his whole life. Tears welled up in her eyes. He's cut me off, said the baby isn't his. He's denying everything. Of course he was. Jonathan had all the integrity of wet tissue. I let her cry. Then, when she quieted, I said, do you have a plan? She shook her head. Then here's one, I said. You're going to finish this pregnancy. You're going to raise that child knowing it's nobody's shame but his father's. And when the time comes, you're going to tell the truth, not to ruin him, but to free yourself. She looked stunned. Why are you helping me? I smiled thinly. Because every woman he's used deserves a soft landing. But don't mistake mercy for reconciliation. I don't want to see you again. Ever. Take this. I slid an envelope across the desk, a modest trust fund I'd quietly created for her unborn child. For the baby, I said. Not you. She took it with shaking hands. I don't know how to thank you. You just did, I said. By leaving. When she was gone, Lydia appeared in the doorway, having overheard just enough. You're a bigger woman than I'd be. I'm not big, I said. I'm strategic. That afternoon, a courier arrived at the office with a cream envelope stamped with the courthouse seal. It was official. The divorce was final. Julia came over with champagne, naturally. To liberation, darling, she said, popping the cork. We toasted, laughing like girls again. What about Jonathan? She asked. His reputation's gone, his accounts are empty, and his golf buddies now call me ma'am. I'd say justice has been served with a side of irony. She grinned. And dessert? Oh, dessert's coming, I said. A month later, the annual Women in Business Gala took place downtown, a glittering affair of sequins, spotlights, and people who never let a tragedy go to waste. I was invited as a guest speaker. My PR team had drafted a polite, empowering speech about resilience and leadership, but I decided to tell my own story instead. When I stepped onto that stage, I could see them all, the powerful, the polished, and somewhere in the back, my husband, pretending to be invisible in his rented tuxedo. The tabloids had eaten his downfall alive. He was now a cautionary tale with a tan. Good evening, I began. My name is Alison Clarke, and I used to think betrayal was the end of a story. Turns out, it's just the prologue. The room went still. I was a wife, a mother, a teacher, a housekeeper, a hostess. I played every role that made other people comfortable. And when those same people broke me, my husband, my daughter-in-law, my son, I did not crumble. I reorganized. Because here's the secret no one tells you. When they set fire to your world, you don't just rebuild. You redecorate. You make the ruins beautiful. A few women laugh, the honest, knowing kind of laugh. I stand here as the owner of Clarke Innovations, I continued, a company reborn from deceit, run by people who believe that success isn't about power, but purpose. And if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed, remember this. your revenge doesn't have to be cruel. It just has to be complete. Applause erupted like a wave, and right there, in front of everyone, I turned toward the back of the room, where Jonathan sat looking like yesterday's champagne flat and forgotten. I raised my glass in a toast. To all the men who taught us what not to settle for, I said. The crowd roared. Jonathan stood, muttered something unintelligible, and stormed out. Cameras caught every second. The clip went viral before I even reached the valet line. By spring, the company's profits had doubled. Lydia became my business partner in name and in spirit. We argued, competed, laughed, and built something formidable. Julia joined the board as legal counsel. It was, as she put it, the sisterhood the patriarchy feared. I kept my house but renovated it. The barrel I'd burned his suits in still stood in the backyard, polished now, with flowers planted around it. My little monument to poetic justice. Every Friday evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip low, the barrel gleaming in the last light. That was my church now. Michael came over often, the younger one too. Slowly, we began to knit a new kind of family, imperfect, scarred, honest. One night, my younger son said quietly, "Mom, I don't know how you did it." I smiled. "Darling, I didn't do it. I stopped waiting for someone else to fix it." A year to the day after that wedding, Clarke Innovations unveiled its newest project, a mentorship and scholarship program for women in engineering, named the Phoenix Initiative. We held the launch at the same venue where my son's wedding had taken place. The symmetry wasn't lost on anyone. I stood at the podium, microphone gleaming under the chandeliers, and said, "1 year ago, I stood in this very hall and thought my life was ending. Tonight, it begins again, not as a wife, not as a victim, but as a woman who learned that when people betray you, they hand you a blueprint. You just have to build something better from it." The applause was thunderous. Somewhere in the crowd, I spotted Nora, no longer the trembling bride, but a mother holding a newborn wrapped in white. She caught my eye, nodded once. I nodded back. Forgiveness wasn't necessary. Understanding was enough. As the lights dimmed and the band began to play, Julia leaned over. "You realize you've done it, don't you?" "Done what?" I asked. "Turned heartbreak into empire." I smiled, slow and certain. "And I'm just getting started." That night, as I drove home, the city lights reflecting off my windshield, I thought of every woman who'd ever been told to sit down, shut up, forgive, forget. I thought of the ones ironing shirts for men who'd already packed their bags, the ones who kept the house running while their dreams gathered dust in drawers. And I wanted to tell them this: you don't have to burn for someone else's comfort. You can light your own fire. I parked, walked into my quiet house, and poured myself a small glass of champagne, the real kind this time, not the metaphorical stuff. I stood by the window, looking at the garden where the barrels still gleamed, and whispered, "Cheers to ashes. They make the richest soil." Then I lifted my glass to the dark, smiled, and said, "Here's to Alison Clarke, the woman who was betrayed, burned, rebuilt, and then taught the world how to rise." And somewhere, deep in the night, it felt like the universe clinked its glass right back.